don't let my accent, make it hard to understand what I'm here to talk about. And I want to thank the first peoples of this country for letting me come here in the first place and set up a home for my family. So I'm Mary Farrow from the Emerald Community House. I'm one of the co-managers. We got so much work, we got 2 managers to run that house. It's up in the Dandenongs, one of 400 community houses in Victoria. I'm also the secretary on the Committee of Management, so I've got a foot in a couple of camps, and the director of the Center of Resilience, which is our own creation. It's an important recognition in this time of adversity. So the Center of Resilience was a model of our own. It's a strategy that we created to be a place where, in case of adversity or calamity or disaster, that we're going to stay open and run something in some capacity to not only stay in touch with the people, but to add confidence to the people. Because a lot of times people say, well, the community house is not going to close, is it? They said that during the pandemic, and they cracked me. I thought, no, hell no, we're not going to close. We're going to stay open because we're the link to the community. It is an important model. It has won a Resilient Australia Award for its idea. Morwell Neighborhood House out in Gippsland is another center of resilience, and we have spoken at the World Community Development Conference a couple of times in Dundee and in Dublin in the last few years before COVID. But it is an important idea for us to, as a community group, as an independent incorporated association, to be empowered to set our own sails. So in recognizing the emergency management sector, that the community at large is an unfunded, untrained group, and they're expected to be the ones that community-led for, we always hear about this community-led recovery, and they're going, what? when did I become this? And I think that that's important for us to acknowledge, number one, that we don't come prepackaged with the information, despite the fact that it's coming at us like through a fire hose. The National Strategy for Disaster Resilience, which I don't know how many of you have heard of that? Okay, good, because it was a revolutionary idea in 2011 that we would have a shared responsibility between all these groups, and individuals, families, community groups, organizations, NGOs. Those are all community sources. So we need to take that seriously and feel that we have a role to play, and not really. I've put those on the list as how they are presented in the strategy, but it's actually the bottom that's holding the top up. It is. Somebody pointed out to me and said, "Oh, it's real command and control. They got the government at the top," and I thought, well, I see that these roles down here, even the businesses, the government's the only one on there by themselves. So it's not solely the domain of emergency management agencies, as I said. So I'm saying that this is a new social contract that we need to take up and hold high and say, well, we are a peer in this environment, and not wait for things to happen. So in our community house in Emerald, we've taken this on board since the Black Saturday fires, where we didn't know anything about anything until that happened, and we thought, well, what the hell went on there? And the lessons learned in Victoria don't have to be learned by the people who burned. They've learned a pretty bad lesson, and what needs to be learned to the people who have not been impacted yet. And we continue to leave these lessons learned to the people who are traumatized by disaster. And heat events is just as big a disaster as anything else. In fact, it was only recognized as a disaster years after the King Lake fires, even though twice as many people died because of the heat event than the fires. And it was considered by the Ambulance Victoria as one of their greatest disasters. People don't call when there's a fire, they don't call the ambulance to come to pick them up and say, well, we need an ambulance. But when they couldn't respond to all those people who were impacted by the heat event, that was a disaster for them. And that was at a time when Ambulance Victoria was part of the health sector, not the emergency sector. Isn't that funny? I remember when I heard that in 2012, and I thought, what? Ambulance is part of the health and not part of emergency? Who are you going to call, when something goes wrong? So when you look at these facilities at our neighborhood house, they've all been built out of our knowledge about what has happened in other communities and what we ought to have. We've got licensed childcare facilities, adult education, part of Department of Training and Education through ACFE. Regular community dining and food supplies. We're part of the food safety program. We've got a community grocery that we set up only in the last year that has free food, locally prepared food, and community garden excess. We've got a community garden that also feeds the grocery. That rhubarb comes straight out of the garden, goes straight in the shop. Sometimes it's sold before it makes it to the box that it goes in. This means that when Woolworths runs out of food, we still got food because we're not relying on it being trucked down from Queensland or some other place. It doesn't even have to get in a car. And he walks right across the parking lot into our grocery. We community newspaper. These things are important. We were talking about other ways of communicating. When there is an extreme heat event, the power goes out because of the demand on the grid, or there can be storms that could contribute to that. So when the power and the communications go out, well, then you haven't got any way to talk to people or to have your air conditioning on or anything like that. So having something in writing, that's really important because that can go on your fridge, that can stay on your table, that can stay in your car. It survives. So we also have free internet, power, recharging power backup, showers, toilets, generators, laundry, public computers. We're traffic management ticket holders. We can shut the road, right? Well, that's a pretty good resource to have, licensed, trained. We've got our community off-grid grocery, which I mentioned earlier, is in a Commonwealth Bank building that was excess to them. It's a 1914 wood-fired bakery, then standing there dormant, collapsing. So we contacted them and said, well, we'll lease it for nothing, but we'll fix it up. So we spent our own money. We put our own money where our mouth is, $86,000. But because we created that, then we qualified for grants from the Commonwealth government to put the battery back up there, plus the generators. Then that came along. So once you put a foot in a profile, it attracts other resources that sometimes you don't have to do a damn thing for. They just say, you're doing good work. We want to give you some money. That's happened to us in the last 3 months. We've had $12,000. All we had to do was say, sign here. Because we want to fund you to get food to the people. We buy the food from Food Bank, and we give it away. We buy the groceries in the grocery store, which we sell, but we own it. If we had to turn that around and give it away, we could do it in a New York minute. So financial resilience is pretty important, too. We spent a lot of time growing our income at the community house, mostly through childcare, and then putting it back into the community in this way. So even if we had to sell up everything and settle up and cover all our liabilities, we'd still have $250,000 in the bank. That allows us to make decisions about $5,000 here or $10,000 there, and we say, well, we should do that. We don't have to wait to report or acquit a grant. We could see that it's needed, we do it now. So the VCAS, in one of their reports, talks about the importance of organizations that have the capacity, the knowledge, the lateral flexibility, the agility to respond to disasters. I mean, after all, they're first responders in most cases. All you have to do is look at what's going on in Lismore, that the services weren't there, and the agencies weren't there, and the government wasn't there. It was the people. And the people don't have any OH&S policy. They get in there and they do what has to be done. And it's amazing how few of them die doing it. It's mostly people driving into the water-covered road that become a statistic. So it's important to begin for us to value this and say, this means something. Because this is where the recovery starts and the response. Okay, disasters for women. We've had a few discussions about that. Women are the largest diverse demographic negatively impacted by these disasters, whether it's fire, heat event, whatever it is. The data is there. The evidence is there. And so if we do things that benefit women, we benefit everybody else because we benefit all those that are in their care, those that are relying on them to take care of Nana and Uncle Tom and Auntie Judy and all the kids. This is an important recognition and ought to elevate the position of women in these roles. If 85% of the caregiving that goes on in this country is done by women, what happens to them in a disaster? They're the first to go. Well, then they should be at the table making decisions about how things is going to get done. Let's have 50% women on the MEMC and the REMC, which is Municipal Emergency Management Planning Committees, right? None of you would, I mean, I shouldn't say none of you, but how many of you know about a MEMC and a REMC? Yeah, it's like, like it's going on with all these plans to help you survive disaster, But it took me years to even get considered as a subcommittee member, despite my profile. All right, we should all have a look at this. The core humanitarian standards. This is important in balancing what we do out there and looking after our own and looking after people, because in these standards, you just have to put in CHS and it'll come up, and then you can read all the small print. But it's not only about who you're helping, it's about who's doing the helping. And make sure you're looking after everybody in a fair and equitable way so that you don't have, reduce the burnout and try to make sure that you're doing the right things with the right resources. People should adopt the core humanitarian standards as a policy. All the humanitarian organizations have. So, why not a neighborhood house? Why not a local government? Right. So we've made a practice of doing these desktop scenarios. I did one for Neighborhood House Victoria, their conference in, it was March 2020, right before the pandemic was official, right? We knew it was happening, but we didn't know it was called COVID, and we didn't know, is it the flu? What is it? And so, interesting enough, the scenario that I created was for a heat event. This is coming on the heels of all these Black Summer fires, so I thought, well, I'm not going to do a fire event because half the people in my audience of 100 already have had firsthand experience, so we don't need to do a pretend scenario about that. But this is a good way for you to work with your community groups in doing desktop scenarios about, either casually in a group or sitting around the table and say, all right, well, let's have a walkthrough of what we would do and what don't we have and what do we think we'd do? Where would we get it, right? So, in my scenario, this is what I presented to the people at the Neighborhood House conference, that they had virtually the facility that we had, that they were in a council building in the peri-urban fringe. It was a heat event, second day of 42 degrees. And what were people going to do? So they all broke up into groups, and each one of them represented a neighborhood house. So I had about 8 in the 2 sessions, 8 neighborhood houses. And I said, right, so here's a scenario. What are you going to do? So these are the main ingredients that I gave to them to use, the resources. And this was the condition, right? This is happening now. This isn't like some imaginary thing, but these are the kind of things that we're starting to see. So they were given that information, and this is what I said to them. Right. So, what are your priorities? You know what you've got going on there. You've got childcare, you've got adult education, you've got seniors, you've got, different things happening. What are you going to do? And what assets will you use? And what do you wish you had? Keep a separate list over here on the side about you wish you had something. Right. And then here's the complexity. As they started to get into it, I said, right, well, at noon the power's been cut. So now you don't have any power because they were all relying on air conditioning, refrigeration, they were all quite confident that. There were a couple of groups that said, just put their pens down. Put their pens down and said, right, well, we're closed. Because our policy would be to close on the second day of a heat event. And some people reacted negatively and said, oh, that's not fair. What about the people? And I said, no. Their duty of care was their staff, making sure that if they're closed and people have to go somewhere else or they won't have children in the child care or whatever it is. Well, that's a legitimate response. It is what it is. But those things are going to happen. You see councils do that, close facilities that ought to be open to people during a pandemic, for example, and then they're told to close. So we got no communications either. So they can't calling any parents or calling anybody to come pick up anybody or calling to say that the power's out. The community kids have got none of that. This is based on real events for us in the hills, okay? So I didn't have to use my imagination to put this together. This is a simple thing. We don't even talk about fires and floods, and we're talking about normal, suburban disasters. So at 3 o'clock, we're going to have a wind change, like we always do. We have a hot, heat event. Here comes the wind change, which a lot of people will say, oh, it's okay now because the wind, it's going to cool down. This is when things start to go out of control. So in this example, they're 5 minutes into this thing, and I'm already throwing this stuff at them, and they're going, oh, they're throwing that piece of paper away. Get the next piece. Okay. You know, what? Okay. And at no time did they want to stop. They just were responding all the time, trying to get it done, trying to stay open, trying to deliver. This is important. So you have road closures, parents can't pick up the kids. Are you going to stay there all night with the kids? Just asking those kind of questions. So you have the capacity to set up your own little scenario or your own little hypothetical and sit in a round table and just explore that. And you'll be surprised some of the funny answers that you'll get. You think, gee, we're going to get a generator after this. Because that's what all my audience said afterwards. Say, what do you wish you had? A generator. A generator. I wish we had a generator. Okay. So you can do this yourself. You have the capacity to do this. The agencies and the local governments and the CFAs and the SA, they're all having these scenarios, and guess who's not there? You. Should be 50% of the ordinary community sitting in a scenario. So you can say, you're going to do what? You're coming, no, you can't go there. They won't be there. They don't know what's going on in the community. They've got a plan, and it's going to be administrated over you. We've seen it already. How many times this year happening where, the plans are laid on top of people who've been doing the recovery for the last 3 days, up in Lismore and all these other places? Right. Hypotheticals is another way to do it. It's a little bit simpler. This is one, if you see that at the bottom, that link for that YouTube, it's still online and kind of funny to watch. But all those people sitting in that across there, and I'm one of them on far right, sitting next to Tony Murphy, who was part of EMV. This was a panel. This is done in 2018. If you listen to this now, you'll think, shit, we're already there. They're talking about 2025. All the stuff they were talking about is exactly parallel to the pandemic, which for us, in our environment, our center of resilience, when the pandemic was announced, we thought, we don't need to do anything new. This is just another disaster. We won't do this, we won't do this. We concentrate on the food, we concentrate on the child care, because we know people are going to need that. The next day, the council contacted, said all the neighborhood houses in the council buildings are closing. You can't be open, we have a pandemic. And I said, well, I sent them an email back and said, I received this email by mistake. You certainly didn't intend that for me. And they said, no, you have to close. I said, well, we're not closing. We're an essential service, and we're staying open. Of course we're staying open. What are you talking about? Now, the other centers closed, and they said, well, they said it was non-negotiable. And I said, yeah, so what? I'm Berkeley, so I have this kind of approach. But this is the hypothetical was really fun because it had people up there who represented homeless person, the hospitals, OSNET, a guy from OSNET. I was representing people who live in the hills or coming to Emerald or coming to Melbourne because we have a fire alert. So it's 3 days where the temperature goes up. So how relevant is that? 2018. So write down that YouTube. You'll find it because it was done by Green Cross, so it's not on their website anymore. But really funny to watch. I mean, funny and, relevant. Right, so, give it a try. Design your own scenario. There's loads of software out there to help you, to do this kind of stuff, or just to kind of cheat and copy it and say, okay, I'm going to do this. And work with your group to say, okay, this is what's happened. We have a fire, or we have a heat event. We're in a house, or we have these people. What are we going to do? Close the roads. Use your imagination. And then use your imagination to reply to it as well. You say, well, we had this. So aren't we smart, And then you say, put that on the list, We need to have that. And you need to provide information back to your local governments about being on in these scenarios. Because I swear to God, they're talking about stuff that you don't understand because you never heard of it. And this is where we learn about the responsibility of local government, state government, the Commonwealth government in these calamities so that we know who to go to when we want to push the button. Because we need to show up. We need to show up. It's no good just being empowered. Act on that empowerment. And don't worry about the consequences. They're not going to throw you out of the country. Otherwise, I would have gone a long time ago. There you go. My kids used to say, they're going to deport you. They're going to kick you out. No. So that's my spiel quickly to try to, get you up to date. I am presenting a scenario at the World Community Development Conference in Darwin that was just replied to me on Friday. So I will take an hour of international, people from all over the place, where we'll go through a scenario and live it. Thank you.